All right, welcome to the All Access Podcast. Thanks for being here. I've got Neverthirst here with me today. Really excited to learn more about what they're doing and share what they're doing. Before we jump into that, I did want to thank one of our sponsors of All Access that helps make this podcast and all of our stuff possible. You know, the fund 100% efficient. That's DMRE. They're here in Dallas and Houston, several other places. They help with brokerage services for multifamily, residential, and industrial land. And they're awesome. We love DMRE. But Matt Letourneau, Jason Berry with Neverthirst is here. I'm really excited to talk with them. Jason's calling all the way from Australia. Where in Australia are you from, Jason?
Lane, I'm from the state of Queensland and about an hour out of the capital, Brisbane.
Got it. And Matt, what country are you from over there?
From the great country of Alabama, the great country of Alabama, specifically the educated in the Auburn region of Alabama. And, we're not quite Texas status where we can feel like we could, secede, and be our own country where you are, Lane. But, one day maybe.
One day. Still SEC country.
SEC.
Who knows? Maybe.
Well, SEC, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Members welcome.
Maybe the SEC will let in Australia as well. Who knows how large they're going to make it. But anyway, would love to hear as much as we can about Neverthirst, what you guys are doing, how you do it. Matt, can you share kind of a little backstory and kind of a big picture overview of who Neverthirst is and what you guys do?
Yeah, a high-level overview of Neverthirst was there were three businessmen that were all in church together here in Birmingham, and they heard a sermon preached on Psalm 67, 1 and 2, where the challenge was, have you disconnected God's blessings in your life with God's purposes for your life? And that led them on about an 18-month journey where they were subjected to and witnessed just abject poverty all over the globe. Committed themselves to prayer, asked the Lord what he would want them to do and if, what their role was in that. And they ended up in Sudan, which is now South Sudan. We're exposed to the water crisis. And that's really where the vision of Neverthirst was born. They came back and said, we really want to solve a very practical problem, which is these people are drinking dirty, disgusting water, which is making them sick. It's causing their babies to be sick. It's causing a myriad of other problems, like the lack of ability to find consistent work, the lack of ability to get any sort of education, obviously the disease on the long walks to water. That's where these ladies and girls were encountering traffickers. And so, just this one domino of being able to provide clean water, safe water, ended up knocking down these other dominoes in social issues. And so they wanted to do it through the church and platform the underground church pastors and believers in these countries that were unreached with the gospel. So they came back, formed a board, raised an initial fund, and went to work. And that was about 2008. Which anyone listening to this would know is just the perfect time to start a nonprofit.
Exactly.
It was in 2008. But the Lord was faithful. And, 16, almost 17 years later, we're still functioning at a very high level. And the Lord's been gracious. And we've been able to serve a little over 1.5 million people.
Wow.
With an eye to serve an additional 2 million people over the next 5 years, if the Lord is so gracious to us.
Wow. I guess I didn't realize that 1.5 million. And yeah, share a little bit more about how it's growing outside of South Sudan, where you guys are at, as much as you're willing to share.
Yeah, I'll share, and then I'll let Jason take the wheel on some of this other stuff. But, the instability of the government and civil war in Sudan, which ended up dividing the country, it became problematic for us to continue to work long-term in South Sudan. But we did end up expanding to other countries. Our focus is exclusively in what missiologists would call the 10-40 window, which is at 10 and 40 degrees latitude on the world map. Those would be the countries that would be considered the most unreached when it comes to ability to access the good news of the gospel of Jesus, and also unreached in terms of inability to access safe drinking water. And so we operate exclusively in that area of the world, which is generally, if you're unfamiliar with that term, North Africa through Central Africa, across the Middle East and across Southeast Asia, working in 3 distinct African countries there, and also 3 distinct Asian countries. We've done work in the Middle East. We've done work outside of that window in the past, but just in the last few years, we've really locked in on that's where we're called to work, is in that geography.
Got it. Yeah, that's awesome. Obviously a shared passion and value of ours. Now, Jason, why don't you take us down to the ground level? Like if we were there in person with Neverthirst, what would it look like? How you guys do what you do? You're working with local church and with local partners. Yeah. Give us as best of a picture as we can of what that looks like on the ground.
Let's take it right down to a lady who right now is probably, it's morning in Australia, but if it was morning in Chad, she would start her day in the village outside of Dabali. She'd probably be, loading up either a donkey with a few jerry cans or herself, and she would start walking. And often leading children at home. Often the eldest child could be 8, 9 years old, and they're caring for the baby. The husband, maybe if he has employment, is a goat herder. He's out working, looking after the goats. And the mother has that burden to walk. And she will start walking to, and I've been with Matt, and we have traveled to Chad, and we have seen these water sources that dry up. Chad in the Sahel region is one of the driest places on earth. They only have one wet season, and that wet season, when it comes, it's good rain. But for 8, 9 months of the year, it's incredibly barren and dry. So that woman will start her day walking, and that return trip alone could be 2 to 3 hours in Chad. In Ethiopia, it could be 6 to 8. So for us, we start finding those areas where women are faced with extreme burden to collect water. We then come alongside indigenous local organizations who know the people on the ground. They are registered with the government as licensed non-government organizations who work alongside communities. They are skilled in engineering, and in our role is to come alongside them and design a strategy together. So we will target a region like the Bali, Chad, or like Halaba in Ethiopia. And we will find a region where the need is great, where we can be for 5 years minimum, and daily solve the water crisis in that area and reduce that burden, what may be now 2 to 3 hours, down to less than 30-minute return trip. Or in some cases, we are trying to increase our level of service to pipe water to the household, so water is actually brought directly to the home. So I guess from a right down level to that lady who's walking, to how we then interface with partners, we select them, we work with them, we design a strategy and program, and then we'll set a goal to achieve full coverage, at least at a basic level of water within 5 years. And then I really work closely with Matt and the team in HQ, and they then come alongside the Neverthirst community who generously say, we're on board to fund that and help you guys see that woman no longer walk that 2 to 3 hour trip.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it in the form of a story, because that's really important. I think a lot of us miss when we talk about the water crisis, which I think we should talk about a little bit more here. I don't think a ton of us really grasp the reality of what that means and the toll it takes, and how important safe drinking water is, and how much of a killer it is as well, especially in kids under 5. But could you just, from your own perspective, Jason, on the water crisis, just your vantage point, kind of what you've come to realize about it, having been there on the ground and seen so much across the world, and what it's really like.
Yeah. But Lane, my wife and I were fortunate to live in Cambodia for many years, and that was when the water crisis hit home for me. Even in our own home, we were on the outskirts of Phnom Penh, in the city, and we regularly would the piped water supply would regularly go off. Even in the city, which was meant to be filtered and treated water, you couldn't drink the water in a major city of 2 million people. When I started traveling out to the villages and actually realizing that, I was living an incredibly privileged life in Phnom Penh city with intimate water flow, of semi-clean water compared to women in villages all around Cambodia who were walking to collect from surface water. And, that really broke my heart for the burden that we have and the opportunity we have to solve what really is a solvable crisis. And when I look at a global scale now, a lot of work has been done by a lot of great organizations, but we're still at it today. 703 million people are collecting water every day from an unsafe source, being either surface water or open well, uncovered well. And for us, that's 703 million people. They're the people we're trying to serve in those countries Matt mentioned in the 1040 window. So, yeah, those situations are real. Again, a lot of great work is being done, and I think we're learning a lot about what is actually good work as well. But the burden that we strive for every day is how do we bring that 703 number down to nothing?
Yep, which is why we're partnering with you guys, because we share that as well. And I mean, 703, that's like it's like double the United States, which is pretty wild to think about. We get people ask us all the time why we don't work in the United States. And it's like, well, when's the last time you drank water from a puddle? Or you had to go get water from a puddle or a river for your baby. So that's why. Hopefully we never work here, is kind of my typical answer.
But we'd be going the opposite direction, that we would have taken a bad turn somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to hear more about the living water aspect as well, because I know that's really important to you guys. Can you share a little bit more, Matt? Feel free to pitch in how you guys incorporate living water into what you do.
Sure. So, I guess, we believe that the Bible is true. We trust, that, the church triumphant is marching forward, in the midst of persecution. And even if you, look at Acts 1 and, just seeing, in Acts 8 and the scattering of the church, the persecution of the church, it's like God's people, even in these unreached places, they're there. They're being persecuted. They're many times underground. And so when a traditional missionary, like a Western presence, a Western missionary, folks like us, we couldn't go over there and have much effect, right? I mean, we couldn't even get access to the country necessarily or have a reason to live in a lot of these places long term, just because of, what are we actually doing there, right, in terms of work. But, there are people in these countries, Christians, largely underground in some of the countries we work in, that have a heart for their own countrymen. And if they go to them and say, hey, we would love to tell you about the good news of Jesus Christ and his gospel, they would be greatly persecuted and sometimes killed for their faith. And so what we're simply doing is we, through our partners, who are all locals and indigenous people, like Jason said, giving these men a platform to be able to go to their own people in their own country and have a reason to be in these unreached villages, these very rural villages, and have a platform to be able to be heard with the message of the gospel because they are meeting their most basic physical need. And so Jason and his team have done a phenomenal job of surveying our partners and their pastor connections and saying, what do you need in order to be the most effective in your context in order to share the gospel? And they give us a list. And we, these people are mostly illiterate, people. So Bible translation and even physical Bibles in many cases don't really help because they can't read them. So they need things like audio Bibles, and they need things like the Jesus film loaded in their own language. And since there's no real electricity anywhere, we've partnered with another organization called Renew Outreach Ministries, and they have solar powered video cameras and speakers and projectors that you can set up literally in the middle of the desert in Africa and show the Jesus film in native tongue with a tribe that is receiving clean water. So I'm sorry, my dog just started going crazy.
That's all right.
A little distracted, but that's the living water piece. Is like we're really asking these underground pastors and Christians, how can we come alongside of you besides clean water to help you be effective in sharing the message of Jesus with people in your own country who don't know them or who don't know him?
Yeah.
And so, and they tell us, and then we bake that into the cost of our programs and go and help them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why it makes sense. We partner with you guys as well. I mean, we definitely align with you there. It's really interesting as I was reading a few years ago, one of the global poverty experts who I believe is agnostic or even atheist, but she was writing and she even admitted that there is no long-term sustainable economic development without addressing spirituality and faith. Because even the places where we're partnering with you guys, I mean, Boko Haram can come through and destroy things in a night. And so empowering, people or helping people follow Jesus, i.e. not kill other people, not kill your neighbors, love your neighbors as yourself is pretty important, obviously. And so that's why we love
podcast, I would guess.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, let's talk about the context. Maybe Jason, you can share a little bit more about our specific partnership in the Sahel and Chad, Niger, what that context is like. You gave us a little bit of a story form, which is really helpful, but what Chad and Niger is like, but also the program itself, the timeline, the goals, what you're hoping to do, all of that.
Yeah, good point. I think the Sahel often is a region it's not a common name. It's this geographical belt or a thick, chunky belt that really extends across a certain range in Africa of countries. It is one of the most driest, so it's from a physical perspective, it is a range where a number of countries, with Chad and Niger are two of them, where access to water is a significant issue, mainly because of the physical climate. But secondly, it's also, as Matt said, the 1040 window where Christianity is, and the Christian church is in the extreme minority. So it's the ideal countries where Neverthirst is. And Chad and Niger are two neighboring countries. We've been active in both these countries now since Chad back in 2016. And we started funding work in Niger, I think, with a pilot in 21. And I think we've learned over the years too, Lane, when we first started, we were doing individual projects. We would be very much working in, this intervention, this community, and then we'd hear of a pastor or a need in another community. And when Matt came on board a few years ago, Matt really shifted the direction of Neverthirst to say, actually, I think it's going to serve us best to have a long-term presence in one region, to see a greater change for the community. But likewise, too, from a donor perspective, donors also want to know what change would be possible. So we then have started a lot of work with all our partners in all the countries Matt mentioned. But in the Sahel, we have a combined strategy in Niger and Chad to serve over, I think, about 208,000 people over the next 5 years, would lead to pretty much full coverage in the two regions that we're in. So what we do is we start with the partners, we get them to survey, figure out a baseline coverage. Now, in some countries we work, the governments are very active, and there is a lot of good baseline data on what actually is the coverage of water, and then you set a goal to achieve full coverage. Other countries, the government, not through a lack of desire, just simply a lack of capacity and staffing ability, don't have the ability to survey every single village to give an accurate baseline. So in Niger, the government's very active, and we're given a good baseline to work from. In Chad, the government lacks that capacity to survey every village, so we sent our partners out to do that. So that's where we started from, was first of all, what is the scale of the problem? And also then what intervention is appropriate. You look at Chad, and traditional hand pump would not be effective because the groundwater table is too deep, number of people pulling from a hand pump is too high. So then we had to look at a bigger intervention. So we went down the path of piped water, which is drilling down to 70, 100 meters. You'll have to put the subtitle in to transcribe meters into feet. But basically, we learnt that in both countries, to provide sustainable water supply, we needed to have a higher level of intervention. And also, too, we wanted to make sure people were reducing that burden. That lady I talked about at the beginning who was walking 2 hours, if we drilled a deep well and had 4 tap stands running off each central bore, then those tap stands can be spread throughout the entire village, reducing the burden to collect.
We might have lost Jason. There he is.
Oh, I'm back again. I'll pick up where I started.
Is that Australian internet?
I think basically what I was saying was I began the story with the lady walking 2 hours. And when we do the deep bore well, with having 4 tap stands running off it, those tap stands could be anywhere from 1 to 2 kilometers, even a mile from the drilling, from the borehole. And therefore, we can have multiple water collection points around the village, reducing that collection time. So we have learned that the style of intervention has to be relevant to its context. And then we've done a lot of work with our partners. We've co-funded drilling rigs to enable them to increase their scale, and work on a 5-year plan to serve everyone in these 2 regions is the end goal.
Got it. Yeah, I love what you said about context-driven interventions, because it depends. And it's interesting from our vantage point, part of our process is start in the most unreached and impoverished places. And when we look at the multidimensional poverty index, that's what the UN uses, SDGs, all of that. And pretty much any way you filter it, Chad and Niger are at the top. And
or the bottom.
Which you mentioned the water take. Yeah, the bottom, but highest MPI, it's like 0.6 in the 0.6 range, which for reference, United States is in like the 0.000 range. But, a lot of, in our space, people tend to confuse effective with cheap. And if you always go with what's cheapest, you'll never work in some of the hardest places because it's more expensive. And so we always see, while cost efficiency is important, cheap isn't necessarily going to cut it. So I appreciate that you said that. And I think lastly, what I'd love to touch on is just some of the lessons learned along the way. I mean, there's, like you mentioned, there's lots of different interventions. We try to learn a lot about what works, what doesn't work in specific areas, what the people actually want for their own lives. That's a big one. We try to listen as much as we can, but would love if you guys would just share some of the lessons you've learned along the way.
Jason, I'll defer to you to answer first, and I'll clean up if anything that we don't say.
I think on the program side, Lane, context is everything, both in the holistic transformation space and also in the WASH space. When Neverthirst first started, back in 2008, probably in the water sector, I think the hand pump was the dominant intervention, and that's what we were mainly doing at the time, because again, in most contexts, that's what was what they were used to using. It was the acceptable technology. But as time goes on, You can see that as more people move into a community, as population migration happens, you need to adjust your intervention. So we have many countries where hand pumps are still the preferred and the most appropriate technology. Cambodia and India, in the unreached locations where we're working, would be classic examples of that. But in I would say in countries like Chad, Niger, and Ethiopia, we've had to learn a lot about how do we upscale ourselves to ensure we have the right intervention. And also we're following the UN guidelines too on, safely managed and basic level of service and limited. And okay, what does it mean to have an intervention to bring everyone up to basic, where at the maximum people are walking no more than 30 minutes? How do we get our head around thinking, okay, how do we design a water program? How many water points are required to hit that goal of less than 30-minute collection? So another good lesson learned from that space has been understanding what is best practice. How do we need to then adjust our interventions to achieve that? And then lastly, I'd probably say, you mentioned before listening. I think what we do really well is we work with our partners. We don't pretend to be the experts in everything, but we have a desire to work very closely with our partners who are on the ground. They are attending the UN cluster meetings. They are part of the whole WASH space, and they understand what their government also is saying is what interventions are appropriate. We want to posture to be a partner with them who listens well. We'll challenge them, of course. We feel there are better solutions, but at the same time, we do want to listen to our partners and then together design what will hopefully be the longest, best sustainable solutions for the communities we're in. So we've learned a lot. I feel we've got a good foundation to continue to spring forward and go forward. And I really want to thank All Access. I think you made a good point before about understanding that context is everything and that cheap often doesn't get a good long-term result. And you guys have backed us with doing some very complex solutions in Chad and Niger. And thank you for being with us on that journey. And it's a great partnership to continue.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I appreciate that.
I mean, I'll just briefly, it's hard to follow Jason talking about that.
It is, man. It is. I'll give you that, Matt.
Really, I mean, he could just be reading the phone book, but it's just the accent. I get you every time.
I don't have an accent. You guys have the accent.
I know. That's why we're so great to listen to, Jason. Wayne, I would say that one of the great things I have learned from Jason is, I came in without a background in, I'm not like a water crisis guy. I mean, I came in from business and, I deal a lot with our major donors and things like that. And a lot of times the question is, well, if we just give a lot more money, we can solve the problem a lot quicker, right? And I learned from Jason, it's like, well, yeah, it's going to take a lot more money, but spending money is one thing, but spending money well is something totally different. And so we've already danced all around it and established this. But I think the reason why, Lane, honestly, like no one has vetted us the way that you guys have vetted us. Like you were the most intense vetting of any outside third-party organization that's ever looked at us. And so you know what I'm talking about when I say this. But in terms of spending money well on a solution that is sustainable with a partner that is been thoroughly vetted and can scale, the things that I've learned in this role is that like not all partners are created equal. And a lot of these guys in the countries that they're in, they're kind of survivors, and their mentality is survival day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And for a lot of orgs that started working through partners, it was hard for them to think past 1 year of what they needed to scale their organization with personnel, the finances, the personnel, the machinery, the hardware, everything, to get them, in some sense, like believing and operating at a much higher level to serve their own countrymen. And so I think what I've learned is that it's 100% possible to get people thinking outside of a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year survival mindset. But it just takes time. And when you get enough of those guys able to do it, then certainly you can have a lot more money and you can solve a lot more problems in this space. But it's not just like that. It just takes time to spend money really well. So the last thing I'll say is Jason and his team have worked unbelievably hard over the last 18 to 24 months to create a runway for us to be able to do $100 million worth of water programming over the next 5 years. And so to get our partners, businesses, these NGOs in a place to where they could say, okay, we've thought through and we know exactly where we can work, how many people are here, the exact number of water points it will take to saturate this region, and it will cost exactly this much money to do it. We're now at a place where it's like, if someone gave us $100 million, we could place it well with sustainable water programming. And that's really hats off to Jason and his team and the level of quality partners that we're actually working with that are able to think long-term and scale their businesses.
Yeah. Well, I love that, Matt and Jason. And yeah, we love it. I mean, that $100 million is a fraction of what's out there in Christian donor advised funds and foundations. And so let's do it and make it happen. And yeah. And Matt, I mean, from our vantage point, the evaluation is pretty easy. We said, hey, are y'all working in this area? What are you doing? And then you'll have baseline surveys, you'll have data. This is what's going to cost. This is how we're going to do it. This is where we're going to do it. So it made the evaluation part really easy from our vantage point. So on behalf of our evaluation team, thanks for making it easier for us. We appreciate you guys.
Well, we appreciate you guys, and I think we just appreciate the level of excellence that you guys are committed to for the donors that trust you to help them make decisions. You know, I mean, a majority of donors are mostly making emotional decisions, you know, but you guys seem to attract a different type of donor that are, you know, coming to you and asking, how can we place money well? And so it's needed in the space, and we've been impressed with what All Access has been able to do. And like Jason said, we've been a tremendous beneficiary, and we love our partnership. So thank you, sir.
Well, I appreciate it. Matt, thanks for sharing that. And if anybody wants to connect with Neverthirst, we can help them do that. That's what we're here to do. But Matt, Jason, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Keep up the amazing work, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks again.
Thanks. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.